I was a contractor with a privately owned small security unit outside of Doha, Qatar. It was a 6-month contract, and it was grueling work at times, but the pay was good. I was just wrapping up my daily duties when my manager called me into his office. "We're heading home early," he said. There were still 2 weeks remaining in our contract, so the news came as a shock to me, but I didn't question it. I was just thrilled to get back home to my loving wife and our beautiful little girl. My first impulse was to phone Carla and give her the good news, but I decided to surprise her instead. I guess I've seen one too many of those YouTube videos of happy soldiers surprising their loved ones, and I wanted to join in the fun. When I drove up to the house in my Mustang, I immediately noticed a strange car in our driveway. On a hunch, I continued past the house, parked off to the side, and doubled back on foot. My daughter Jamie was in school, so I knew Carla was home alone. Only she wasn't alone. A quick peek through the window told me everything I needed to know. There, standing in our living room, was my darling wife with her arms wrapped around some guy I had never seen before. They kissed, and my entire world immediately went red. I could feel the anger within me boil over, and my gut reaction was to crash through the window and strangle both of them. But I took a moment to concentrate on my breathing, just as I was trained. They both would pay, but not just yet. That afternoon, I met with my buddy, Sal. He was one of my best friends growing up, but today he's a big-shot lawyer. I knew he wouldn't mind giving me a little free advice. "I'm leaving Carla," I stated flatly, once we had dispensed with the usual greeting. His jaw dropped. "You're kidding," he said. I shook my head slowly and deliberately. "Why?" he asked. "The treacherous woman cheated on me," I stated calmly. "But you two have been happily married for over 20 years, he said. "You have a wonderful life together and a beautiful daughter. Why would she do that?" "Her reasons and motivation doesn't matter to me," I said. "She cheated. End of story. It's divorce time." For the next hour, we proceeded to discuss the divorce laws in my state. Because I was the main breadwinner in our family, I was subject to a temporary maintenance formula of 40% of my income minus 50% of hers, regardless of her ability to support herself. But that wasn't the worst of it. Because we were married more than 20 years, I would be ordered to pay a lifetime alimony if I stood in front of a judge. The property split would be equitable, which basically meant that would also be at the whim of the judge. Then there was the matter of Jamie. I loved my little girl to death, and there was no way I was leaving her or splitting my time with her. I thanked Sal for his time and left the diner in a hurry. I made a stop at our bank, where another friend of mine worked. He was happy to help me withdraw all the money I could and stash it away in a little account he set up in the Caymans. My next stop was a travel agency. There was only one task left for me to do at that point. I waited outside the house that night and checked my watch. 2 o'clock in the morning. Both of them had to be sleeping by then. I made my way to our front door, dressed in my black fatigues and carrying my duffel bag. I jimmied the lock and made my way inside. Employing my training in stealth, I swiftly moved up the stairs and knelt outside the bedroom door. I reached into the duffel bag and produced a canister of ether that I had purloined from the medical supply closet at the base many years ago. I attached the canister to some tubing, fed it under the door, and released the valve. While I waited, I extracted a pair of night vision goggles and a gas mask from my bag. When I figured enough time had elapsed, I swiftly moved inside the door and placed a rolled-up towel under the door to keep the gas trapped inside. I moved to the side of the bed. Sure enough, they were both knocked out cold. There was one piece of equipment remaining in my bag, a scalpel. My mother was a veterinarian, and I had assisted in several neutering procedures. This would be no different, I told myself. I gave one last look at the two of them before opening the bedroom door. The ether would wear off shortly, and I knew I didn't have much time. I moved down the hallway and swept up Jamie in my arms. I carried her outside to my Mustang and strapped her in her car seat. Amazingly, she slept through the whole thing. I made one last visit to the house that I had once called home before I jumped into the driver's seat and sped down the road past the house. In my rear view, I could see the flames already building. "Where are we going, Daddy?" Jamie suddenly asked, startling me a bit. "We are going on vacation," I answered with a smile. "A permanent vacation, honey. Just you and me." I'd spent half my adult life in security operations, private contractor work for the highest bidder. The money was great, but the cost was steep. I'd missed Jamie's first steps, her first words, and countless birthdays. But it had been Carla who encouraged me to take these assignments. "We need the money," she'd say, "for Jamie's future." Carla and I had met in college. She was the beautiful psychology major, and I was the ex-military guy on the GI Bill studying criminal justice. The attraction was instant, and within a year, we were married. A few years later, Jamie came along and our life seemed perfect. Or so I thought. The highway stretched endlessly ahead as I drove through the night. Jamie had fallen back asleep in her car seat, clutching the stuffed penguin I'd brought her from Qatar. My mind raced through the contingency plans I'd been formulating for years, not for this specific situation, but because planning for the worst was in my nature. 3 hours into our drive, I pulled over at a 24-hour rest stop to grab coffee and let Jamie use the bathroom. She was groggy but compliant, asking few questions. At 6 years old, she had the uncanny ability to sense when not to push. Maybe she'd inherited my intuition after all. "Daddy, where's Mommy?" she finally asked as we got back in the car. I'd prepared for this question. "Mommy needed to stay home, sweetie. Sometimes grown-ups need time apart to figure things out." She seemed to accept this answer, and I silently thanked whatever gods might be listening that she didn't press further. I wouldn't lie to my daughter, but the full truth wasn't something her young mind needed to bear. By dawn, we'd crossed state lines. I disposed of my phone in a trash can at a gas station after removing the SIM card and battery. The burner phone in my pocket would serve our needs for now. I'd already memorized the contact information for my connections at the boat dock. The Cayman Islands account held enough to get us started, $175,000 to be exact. Not enough to live luxuriously forever, but enough to establish new identities and set up somewhere quiet. The Caribbean had always called to me. Carla had preferred European vacations. I thought about the house as we drove, wondering how quickly the flames would consume it. I'd been methodical, making sure the fire would appear to have started from an electrical fault in the master bedroom. The accelerant I'd used would be largely consumed, leaving little evidence, and with both occupants likely succumbing to smoke inhalation before waking from their ether-induced sleep, there would be no witnesses. "Are you sad, Daddy?" Jamie asked, interrupting my thoughts. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her innocent face framed by dark curls so like her mother's. "Just thinking, sweetheart." "About Mommy?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, about Mommy." "I saw Mommy with that man before," she said matter-of-factly, her eyes fixed on the passing scenery. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. "You did?" "He came over lots of times when you were away. Mommy told me he was her friend from work and I shouldn't tell you because it would make you sad." The betrayal cut deeper with each word from my daughter's mouth. Not only had Carla cheated, but she'd involved our daughter in the deception. I fought to keep my voice steady. "Did you ever talk to this man?" Jamie shook her head. "Mommy always made me go to my room when he came over, but I heard them laughing a lot, and other noises." I swallowed hard, focusing on the road ahead. There was no going back now. Any doubt I might have harbored about my actions evaporated with my daughter's innocent confession. The coastal town of Puerto Viejo in Costa Rica became our new home. I'd chosen it carefully, small enough to remain inconspicuous, but with enough tourists and expats that two Americans wouldn't stand out. The locals were friendly but not intrusive, and the international school where I enrolled Jamie had a good reputation. We settled into a modest house near the beach, surrounded by lush jungle. Our new identities were simple: Robert and Emma Wilson, father and daughter from Seattle, looking for a quieter life after the death of my fictional wife. The documents my contacts had provided were flawless: passports, birth certificates, even school records for Jamie. For the first few months, I constantly looked over my shoulder. Each time a police car passed or an unfamiliar face lingered too long in our vicinity, my heart would race. But gradually, the paranoia subsided. News of the tragic fire had made international headlines briefly. American contractor and wife die in house fire, daughter missing. But interest waned quickly. I found work as a security consultant for a hotel chain, mostly advising on systems and protocols. The hours were reasonable, and I was home every day when Jamie finished school. We developed a routine: homework, dinner, walks on the beach at sunset. On weekends, we'd explore the jungle, visit nearby towns, or simply read books on our porch while listening to the waves. Jamie adapted better than I'd expected. She asked about her mother occasionally, and I maintained the fiction that Mommy had had to stay behind, but loved her very much. As time passed, these questions became less frequent. She made friends at school, learned Spanish with the effortless fluidity of childhood, and developed a passion for marine biology after we took a snorkeling trip to the coral reefs. A year into our new life, I received word through one of my old contacts that the investigation into the fire had been closed. The official conclusion: accidental death due to faulty wiring, with the presumption that I had kidnapped Jamie during a custody dispute. There was a warrant for my arrest, but with no leads on our whereabouts and presumed false identities, the case had gone cold. I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt hollow. The revenge I'd enacted had been swift and absolute, but it hadn't filled the void left by Carla's betrayal. Some nights, after Jamie was asleep, I'd sit on our porch with a glass of rum, wondering if I'd gone too far. Those moments of doubt never lasted long. I'd remember Jamie's words about the friend from work, and the pain would transform back into righteous anger. 3 years passed in our tropical haven. Jamie grew taller, her features maturing to reflect more of me than her mother, a small mercy. She excelled in school, particularly in science and languages. I watched her flourish with a fierce pride tinged with sadness that our life together had come at such a cost. I dated occasionally, brief, casual relationships with tourists or expat women who didn't ask too many questions about my past. None of them met Jamie. I kept that part of my life separate, protective of our carefully constructed reality. Until Elena. She taught at Jamie's school, art and environmental science. Argentinian by birth, but a citizen of the world, as she described herself. Our first meeting was at a parent-teacher conference, where she praised Jamie's creativity and curiosity. There was something about her direct gaze and unaffected manner that drew me in. When she suggested coffee to discuss Jamie's interest in an upcoming science project, I found myself accepting. One coffee led to another, and soon we were meeting regularly, no longer under the pretense of discussing my daughter. Elena had a way of asking questions that made me want to answer truthfully, even as I maintained our cover story. She'd been through her own hardships, an abusive marriage she'd fled, leaving behind family and friends in Buenos Aires. "We all have ghosts, Robert," she said one evening as we walked along the beach. "I see them in your eyes sometimes." She didn't press, but her quiet acceptance of my mystery offered a strange comfort. Jamie adored her, which both pleased and terrified me. Any attachment to another person represented a risk to our carefully constructed life. Yet I couldn't deny the way Elena's presence smoothed some of the jagged edges Jamie and I had been navigating around for years. On the 5th anniversary of our arrival in Costa Rica, I received another message from my contact. Someone was asking questions about the fire, a private investigator hired by Carla's sister. My heart raced as I read the details. The PI had traced a large withdrawal from our joint account made the day of the fire and was following the money trail. For a week, I lived in heightened vigilance, preparing for the worst. I updated our emergency plans, secured new documents for yet another set of identities, and emptied our safety deposit box at the local bank. I told Jamie we might need to take a trip soon, planting the seed for another sudden departure. But then came another message. The PI had been called off. The money trail had gone cold at a bank in Miami, and Carla's sister couldn't afford to continue the investigation. We were safe, at least for now. That night, sitting with Elena on our porch after Jamie had gone to bed, I made a decision. Perhaps it was the relief of the immediate danger passing, or perhaps it was the realization that I couldn't live indefinitely in the shadow of my past actions. "My name isn't Robert," I said quietly, watching her face in the dim light. "And my wife didn't die in Seattle." She took a slow sip of her wine, regarding me steadily. "I know." "You know?" She nodded. "Not the details, but I've known you weren't who you claim to be. The way you scan rooms when you enter them. The way you never talk about life before Costa Rica. The nightmares Jamie sometimes mentions." I felt exposed and strangely relieved simultaneously. "Aren't you going to ask who I really am?" "Does it matter?" Elena set down her glass. "The man I know is kind, devoted to his daughter, and carries a burden I can only guess at. That's the man I've come to love, whatever his name might be." I found myself telling her everything, not in one night, but over many weeks. The contract work, Carla's betrayal, the fire, our escape. I omitted some details, particularly about what I'd intended to do with the scalpel, but the broad strokes of my crime were laid bare. Elena listened without judgment. When I finally finished my confession, expecting her to recoil in horror, she simply took my hands in hers. "We can't change the past," she said. "Only decide what kind of future we want to build from its ashes." Jamie turned 12 on a brilliant summer day. We celebrated with a party on the beach, her school friends, Elena, and a few of our closer acquaintances from town. As I watched my daughter laughing with her friends, bronzed by the sun and wiser than her years, a profound contentment settled over me. Elena moved in with us the following month. Our little family expanded again a year later when she gave birth to our son, whom we named Miguel. Jamie embraced her role as big sister with enthusiasm and tenderness that sometimes brought tears to my eyes. The past receded further with each passing year. Occasionally, news from the States would reach us. An old friend of Carla's had published a book dedicated to her memory. The property where our house had stood had been redeveloped into condominiums. Each time I would feel a momentary tightness in my chest, but it no longer consumed me. In Jamie's 16th year, she came to me with questions that could no longer be deflected with vague explanations. She remembered more than I'd realized about our former life, about her mother, about the night we left. So I told her a version of the truth, that her mother had betrayed us, that I had taken her away to protect her, that I had made choices in anger that couldn't be undone. I expected hatred, or at least judgment. Instead, she listened with the same steady acceptance Elena had shown years earlier. "I remember that night," she said when I finished speaking. "I wasn't really asleep when you carried me out. I knew something bad was happening, but I felt safe with you." "Do you hate me?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head slowly. "I used to wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed. If Mom hadn't—" She trailed off. "But then we wouldn't have Elena or Miguel or this life. And despite how it started, it's been a good life, hasn't it, Dad?" I pulled her into an embrace, marveling at the resilience and wisdom of this young woman who had once been the small child I'd spirited away in the night. "Yes," I whispered into her hair. "It's been a good life." 20 years after the fire, with Jamie studying marine biology at a university in Europe, Miguel entering his teenage years, and Elena and I settled into the rhythms of our life together, I received a final message from my old contact. The case had been officially closed, the statute of limitations on kidnapping having expired. My name had been cleared from active databases. In effect, the man I had been no longer existed, even in the eyes of the law. That evening, we walked along the same stretch of beach where Elena and I had first begun to know each other. The setting sun painted the sky in fiery oranges and reds, a palette that once would have triggered memories of that night. Now, it was simply beautiful. "Are you at peace?" Elena asked, her hand warm in mine. I considered the question carefully. The anger that had driven me to such extremes had burned itself out long ago. What remained was a quiet acknowledgement of the path that had led us here. Neither pride nor shame, but acceptance. "Yes," I said finally. "I think I am." In the end, revenge hadn't brought the satisfaction I'd expected. It had simply been the catalyst for a different life, one that, through all its complications and moral ambiguities, had ultimately led to a deeper peace than I could have imagined on that terrible day when my world had exploded in betrayal. The man who had meticulously planned his wife's demise no longer existed. In his place stood a father, a partner, a member of a community, a man who had learned that the best revenge wasn't destruction, but in creating something new from the ashes of what was lost. As we turned toward home, the last light of day fading behind us, I understood that some bridges needed to burn so that new ones could be built. And while I couldn't undo the fire I'd started, I could ensure that what rose from its ashes was worthy of the cost. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.